Okay, so I want to issue an apology. Way back when I posted that first video, I made mention of doing 1 or 2 videos a week. That obviously hasn't happened because this is my first video since then, and it's been a while. But here I am, ready to get started, and I've got a topic that I've been brewing for a while, and something I've been wanting to talk about, and I think now's a good time to do it and get started on something regular. My goal is a video a week. We'll see how that goes. All right, so I've been seeing a lot, both from comic book fans, particularly comic book fans, about the whole political thing. Like, some of you are going to agree with me, some are going to disagree, and that's okay. I'm not trying to start a war. I'm literally just here to discuss, to talk, and educate in a way. So before I get too crazy into this, the first thing I want to say is I personally do not think one person should force their political views into the material. I think saying something very specific that is clearly a political statement isn't something that should be done. But at the same time, there are socially political cases where it absolutely belongs in it, because that's what the medium has been for. And the first thing I want to talk about are some characters who were created with politics behind it. You know, that is something that a lot of people don't realize, is how political comic books have always been. And they don't give it any second thought because they weren't around when those characters first came out. The first one, obviously, that I'm going to talk about, it most notably, is my favorite, Superman. Superman was created back in the late 30s during the Depression. So when Superman was created, he was the champion of the helpless and oppressed. And aside from him, there was nothing science fiction in the story. He was a survivor of a doomed planet from far away, brought to Earth, and now here he is living amongst us. That's the only science fiction element to early Superman stories, was him. His powers weren't anywhere near what they are today. You know, leap tall buildings in a single bound, faster than a speeding bullet. They were physical because Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster created him off of mythological figures of strength. You know, in the Bible you had Samson. There was Hercules in Greek mythology. You know, so that's where all of his abilities were. His abilities were strictly physical. But Superman, especially in the early days, he fought real-world social evils. Hit and runs. There was drunk drivers, rigged prize fighters, wife beaters. It had nothing to do with the left or the right. It was right and wrong. The next big one is literally in the name, Captain America. With the MCU, who doesn't know who Captain America is? But he's a patriotic super soldier. He fought the Axis powers in World War II. He punched Adolf freaking Hitler. His very, very first issue is him punching Adolf Hitler on the cover.
I've knocked out Adolf Hitler over 200 times.
He had a star-spangled uniform, and his girlfriend's name was Betsy Ross, named for the very same woman who was credited with creating the American flag. It doesn't get much more political than Captain America, really. It doesn't. Co-creator Joe Simon even said Cap was a political creation, that he and Jack Kirby were disgusted with the Nazis, and they felt that the U.S. involvement in the war was inevitable. He said, and I quote, "The opponents to the war were all quite well organized. We wanted to have our say too." And another big one is Black Panther. The Black Panther character predates the Black Panther Party. He wasn't created in response to it. And yes, it was done politically because there were no African American characters back then. They were all white. So Stan Lee created a black one. He was the very first one. He was before the Falcon. He was before Blade. He was before John Stewart Green Lantern. So that being said, with all of that covered, let's go into some of the more current stuff. My favorite one, this is my absolute favorite one, is the Comicsgate movement. I honestly don't know who came up with this. It is people literally complaining about diversity. You go to work and you see white people, black people, Hispanics, Asians. You see all of them working together. And yet somehow opening up a comic book and reading a story about a Muslim superhero is wrong. They're calling it forced diversity. In some ways, I can understand how it might seem forced because now they're trying to catch up. DC and Marvel Comics are trying to catch up with the rest of the world because they've been stuck in a rut. And they've been trying to get out of that rut so where it's not all just straight white characters. I get that. I support that. And I do feel like it's something that should have been addressed 10 years ago. Hell, even when I was in high school, I graduated high school 15 years ago. I remember reading an issue of Green Lantern, and there was a character by the name of Terry. I can't remember a whole lot of it. I'm just going off memory right now. But there was a character by the name of Terry who was openly gay. He was a friend of Kyle's. His parents were struggling with the fact that he was gay, and he had his boyfriend, and they were trying to set up a life. And then, sure enough, mom comes around, and she wants to give it a try because she wants to have a relationship with her son. Terry's boyfriend, he was excited, he was happy, he said that's exactly what he needs now. He goes walking into the bathroom where Terry is. They're having a party. I think Terry was getting ready. He walks in, and Terry has a Green Lantern ring slipped on his hand. And 17-year-old me, 18-year-old me, I thought that was amazing. I absolutely thought that was brilliant. It's like a gay. That's what we need right now. That was a great start. A gay Green Lantern would be fantastic, and nothing came of it. So now here we are in 2019, in the era of social media, and comic book companies are starting to put out a little more diversity, and people are now complaining about it because they don't want to see it, because they want escapism, and that's the biggest reason. I had one guy. I made the mistake of asking what is Comicsgate on my old Twitter account. And one guy just wanted this whole thing. Is, we want escapism. We don't want this. We don't want that. We don't want real world stuff in comic books. That's the best place for it. I'm not saying to blatantly throw out your own personal opinions or call people by certain names or insult people based on their political opinions. I'm talking about social stuff we can all agree on. That absolutely belongs in comic books. It absolutely does. So a gay superhero is appropriate. And we have one. She's a very popular character, Batwoman, because so many people are unaware that this version of Batwoman has been around for over a decade. They are absolutely freaking out over the Batwoman show. It's like, because they're so unfamiliar with the character, they don't realize that this is nothing new, that this is something that's been around. But even that being said, there are still people who know about the character are throwing a fit because they, again, see it as forced diversity. It's got to happen. It's going to happen. Some of this should have happened 10, 15 years ago, but the fact that it's happening now just seems rushed, and social media just doesn't help out. One such example was actually in Action Comics 900. And in that issue, Superman had kind of a heated discussion with a military official because of his actions in a foreign country. And I loved it. I thought the story was great because in the story, Superman renounces his American citizen, or he doesn't renounce it. He says he intends to renounce his American citizenship. I thought that was brilliant because Superman doesn't just want to help Americans. He wants to help everybody. And he even said in the story, truth, justice, and the American way aren't enough anymore. So he's literally just removing the American way from truth and justice. It doesn't mean he's lost any of those values. He's just saying we need a different approach. And this is how I'm going to do it, because he was tired of his actions being perceived as official U.S. policy. It's literally written right there in the book. And yet, people perceive that as him hating America.
America now celebrating the death of Osama bin Laden. Here you have Superman denouncing America. I'm thinking the geniuses behind DC Comics, which publishes Superman, they got to be pretty embarrassed by this. Talk about bad timing.
I was working in the industry at the time that issue came out, and one guy came in ranting and raving because he hates America. And I told him, I said, that's not what it is. I grabbed the book, I showed him, I said, he did this, the U.S. government didn't like it, and he said, look, I'm over it. I want to help everyone, not just Americans. And this guy just kind of sat there and he goes, well, why aren't the news articles saying that? Because it doesn't grab headlines. It doesn't get people angry. It doesn't get people riled up. That's why.
Here you have Superman denouncing America.
When it comes to politics in comic books, in pop culture, there is a place for it. If it's related to society. If it is something we're seeing commonly. Okay, to say comic books should never be political, they always have been. Always. To say science fiction should not be political, it depends on the science fiction. If we're talking like Alien and Predator, no, those are just slugfests. If we're talking something like Star Trek, Star Wars, yeah, that's political. There's political stuff going on in there. And oftentimes, the politics in comic books, the politics in Star Wars, the politics in Star Trek are reflective of what's going on in society. Whether you agree with it or not, it's all reflection. You're literally looking in the mirror. And that's the whole point. We see more Muslims now because we're more aware of it. We see more Jews now because we're more aware of it. But it doesn't mean that we're being politically correct. We're just being a little more open about it. There are people who serve in the military who are Muslim. There are people who serve in the military who are Jewish, atheist, Republican, Democrat. Diversity is literally everywhere. So why should it not be in comic books? Comic book companies are behind, but they're not wrong. Now, do we want good storytelling? Absolutely. Oh my God, yes, please give us good stories. And I've got boxes of comic books with good and bad stories. It's going to happen. There are going to be some people who tell a better story featuring this minority character than there are others. And sometimes it's going to, based on that person who tells a bad story, it's going to seem like it's being forced. Give them some feedback. Help them out. You want the stories to get better? Don't just complain about wanting it to stop. That's just, it's not going to work. So, with that in mind, keep an open mind. Don't get me wrong, I love slugfest stories. I love good, well-written stories where the hero is just reeling, trying to figure everything out. I love those, but at the same time, I love stories that we can all relate to. I love stories that can teach a lesson. We call those morals. Growing up, having stories read to us, we'd all get the moral of the story at the end. It's no different than the fairy tales we were told as children. As an adult, you're more cognizant of it. Let me know what you think in the comments. Are you a Comicsgate supporter or are you not a Comicsgate supporter? Hit me up in the comments. Follow me on social media. Let me know what you have to think. If you have suggestions for the show, topics maybe you'd like to see discussed, I will do research on it. I already have my idea for next week lined up. That's going to be one that I'm going to put a lot of work into, especially with the research. Also, if you have a story, comic book story you'd recommend, please let me know. Just because Superman's my favorite superhero doesn't mean it's Superman and DC stories that I only read. I'm down to read just about anything. I'm just not into gore. You recommend a gore story for me? I'm not going to read it. Not my thing. Don't mind horror, hate gore. So keep that in mind. Anyway, with all that said, thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Happy reading, happy collecting.